The killing began immediately in several ways, often by individual Japanese soldiers or up to 30 soldiers together going about, each one seeming to have the power of life or death. And then soon there was organized killing of great bodies of men, and I passed columns of men being taken out to be killed. These people were being killed by rifle fire and machine gun principally. Also we knew of groups of several hundred being bayoneted to death. And the cause now before us to God shall be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God. John Gillespie McGee. I was a missionary of the Episcopal Church at Nanking from 1912 to 1940.
John McGee, an American missionary. The 105 minutes of footage he captured at great personal risk became the most irrefutable evidence in the trial of Iwane Matsui. As the supreme commander of the Japanese forces during the Nanjing Massacre, Iwane Matsui was designated a Class A war criminal, bearing inescapable responsibility for his heinous crimes. Starting in 1907, Iwane Matsui was engaged in espionage and intelligence work in China. Having lived there for many years, he became a China hand. During his tenure, he was deeply involved in plotting and actively supporting acts of aggression against China. On December 1, 1937, the Japanese Imperial General Headquarters accepted Iwane Matsui's proposal to attack Nanjing and issued a formal order to launch the assault. On the night of December 5, 1937, invading Japanese forces launched a full-scale offensive against the outer defensive lines of Nanjing, marking the beginning of the Battle of Nanjing. On December 7th, he issued orders to mop up specific sectors of the city upon the fall of Nanjing. This directive paved the way for the horrific atrocities of the Nanjing Massacre. On December 13, 1937, Nanjing fell. Recalling the scenes at the time, John McGee said that for 6 agonizing weeks, the city was turned into a living hell. On December 17th, the invading Japanese forces held a formal entry ceremony to mark the occupation of Nanjing. Iwane Matsui entered the city through Zhongshan Gate to review the troops. During the Nanjing Massacre, the Japanese army carried out 28 cases of large-scale mass killings, claiming over 190,000 lives and 858 cases of sporadic slaughter, claiming approximately 150,000 more. In total, the Japanese military massacred over 300,000 people. In May 1946, the International Military Tribunal for the Far East began a trial lasting over 2 years, examining the war crimes of 28 Japanese Class A war criminals, including Iwane Matsui. Finally, Iwane Matsui received his sentence, death by hanging. Despite his desperate denials, Count 55 remained an immovable verdict. As commander, he stood by and failed his duty. This crime of omission became the final judgment that sent him to the gallows. Ironically, this blood-stained executioner is still honored in the Yasukuni shrine, revered as a hero by some. 14 of the 28 Class A war criminals convicted in Tokyo trial are enshrined here. During the Japanese militarists' war of aggression against China, beyond the artillery fire and massacres, Doihara was one of the most dangerous demons behind the scenes. Kenji Doihara, a Class A war criminal convicted by the International Military Tribunal for the Far East, remains honored to this day at the Yasukuni shrine. While justice may have been delayed, history ultimately proved that conspiracies cannot be legitimized, and aggression will eventually be held to account. On September 18, 1931, the September 18th incident broke out, marking the beginning of Japanese militarists' war of aggression against China, a conspiracy that was thoroughly plotted. Long before the incident, Doihara had been active in northeast China for years, sowing chaos through money, threats, and false promises. His mission was covert, to manufacture a pretext for Japanese militarists' intervention and conditions for occupation. The Japanese troops blew up a section of railway in northeast China and accused Chinese forces of sabotage. This was no accident. It was a staged plot with Doihara among the chief screenwriters. The Japanese Kwantung Army launched a full-scale invasion in response, and within a few months, the 3 provinces of northeast China fell under Japanese control. However, Japan was not satisfied with mere military occupation. It moved on to an even more deceptive project, the fabrication of a puppet state in China to be known as Manchukuo. In this process, Doihara played a particularly brutal role. He was directly responsible for identifying, controlling, and manipulating a so-called political symbol, and that symbol was Puyi, the last emperor of the Qing dynasty. Doihara approached Puyi constantly with the lure of restoring the monarchy and protecting the royal family, while simultaneously coercing him with military force and threats to his life. He calculatedly engineered Puyi's route out of Tianjin to northeast China, controlled his movements, and severed his communications with the outside world. The so-called inviting Puyi to return was, in essence, a political kidnapping orchestrated by Doihara. In 1932, the puppet state of Manchukuo was established, but this nominal country had no sovereignty, no independent diplomacy, and no military authority. All major decisions were made by the Japanese Kwantung Army and its intelligence agencies. Puyi was merely a puppet on display, manipulated by Japan. On August 16, 1946, at the International Military Tribunal for the Far East in Tokyo, Puyi testified as a key witness. As a direct witness to Japan's conspiracy to invade northeast China, Puyi emphasized that his role was never voluntary, but had been forced by Japan to leave Tianjin and go to northeast China. This testimony shattered the lie that Manchukuo was an act of national self-determination. It became one of the tribunal's crucial pieces of evidence that Japan had invaded China and violated its sovereignty. As a result, Kenji Doihara was firmly placed in the dock of history and law. Doihara was an infamous schemer who wallowed in nefarious tactics, espionage, cold-blooded assassination, and the treacherous subversion of his targets. In November 1948, Doihara was convicted as a Class A war criminal for crimes against peace, violations of the laws and customs of war, and crimes against humanity, and waging wars of aggression and war conspiracies against China, the United States, the United Kingdom, and other nations. On December 23, 1948, Kenji Doihara was executed by hanging. From covert schemes to blatant massacres, the evils of militarism never ceased. Pearl Harbor, Hawaii, the United States. The USS Missouri, now decommissioned, was one of the largest battleships of the US Navy during World War II. On the morning of September 2, 1945, the ceremony marking Japan's unconditional surrender was held on its deck, formally declaring the complete defeat of Japanese militarism and the final victory in the world's anti-fascist war. In this footage, the 2 men signing the instrument of surrender on behalf of the Japanese emperor, the government, and the Army General Staff are Mamoru Shigemitsu, then Japan's foreign minister, and Yoshijiro Umezu, chief of the Army General Staff. In March 1934, Yoshijiro Umezu was dispatched to China. His role ran through the entire course of Japan's aggression, from the invasion of northeast China to the collapse of the Pacific War. His name is closely associated with some of Japan's most notorious wartime crimes, including Unit 731 and the brutal 3 alls policy: kill all, burn all, loot all. In May 1935, Umezu presented an outrageous demand to expel Chinese forces from North China. He then redeployed Japanese troops south from northeast China, coercing Hu Yingqin into signing the He-Umezu Agreement, effectively opening the door for Japan's full-scale military expansion into North China. In 1938, Umezu became commander of the Japanese First Army. He enforced the savage 3 alls policy, inflicting immense suffering on the Chinese people. Statistics show that during the entire war of resistance against Japanese aggression, as many as 7 million civilians in North China were killed under the 3 alls policy. One of the most heinous units Japan deployed in China was Unit 731. When it was first established, the unit had no official designation. It was Yoshijiro Umezu, then commander of the Kwantung Army, who granted it its code number and helped expand its operations. That's why he is widely regarded as the man behind Unit 731. At least tens of thousands of Chinese, Soviet and Korean civilians and Allied prisoners of war were used as live subjects in human experiments, dying in extreme pain and cruelty. This chapter of history remains an indelible scar on the conscience of human civilization.
日本侵华细菌战部队在其建立和扩张的过程当中，得到了日本政府、日军大本营、日本关东军、日本医学界的勾结与多方配合，这充分证明了日本细菌战是自上而下的、有预谋、有组织的国家犯罪。
As a loyal executor of Japan's expansionist militarist strategy, Umezu did not limit his crimes to China. In 1941, having previously taken part in the Russo-Japanese War, Umezu organized large-scale military exercises targeting the Soviet Union as a hypothetical enemy. He continued to train Kwantung Army forces and sent large numbers of elite troops to the Pacific Theater. At the Tokyo trial, Yoshijiro Umezu was one of the highest-ranking military officers among the defendants. He was convicted as a Class A war criminal and sentenced to life imprisonment in November 1948. Although he escaped execution, justice was not denied forever. On January 8, 1949, Umezu died of rectal cancer in Sugamo Prison in Tokyo, without ever admitting guilt. After his death, Umezu's spirit tablet was enshrined at Yasukuni Shrine. The crimes of individuals ultimately culminate in the terror of a nation's war machine. The shadow of Tojo Hideki, Japan's Class A war criminal, still lingers. On December 23, 1948, the chief architect of Japan's war of aggression in Asia met his end. Tojo Hideki, the prime minister whose actions and policies significantly expanded the scope and brutality of World War II in Asia, was executed by hanging. The International Military Tribunal for the Far East found him guilty on multiple counts. He became the face of Japanese militarism, responsible for a full-scale and expanded aggression against China, the attack on Pearl Harbor, the invasion of Southeast Asia, and immense suffering across the Asian continent. Tojo Hideki is known as the Razor General, started serving as the Prime Minister of Japan from October 1941. As a central architect of the aggression war against China, policies under his oversight led to atrocities such as the 3 alls policy, a scorched earth campaign of killing, burning, and looting. He was directly involved in authorizing biological warfare programs, including the notorious Unit 731, where human experimentation was carried out on living prisoners. His responsibility extended far beyond Asia. Tojo knew of and sanctioned the brutal treatment of prisoners of war. Events like the Bataan Death March, along with first-hand accounts from forced labor camps across the region, became enduring symbols of that cruelty. Under his leadership, tens of thousands of Allied prisoners of war and millions of Asian civilians perished. At his trial, Tojo defended Japan's actions as legitimate self-defense, a claim the judges completely rejected. The trial was meant to be a permanent lesson that militarism leads only to ruin and judgment. But has that lesson truly been learned? Decades later, the symbols and mindset of that dark era persist. Quite a number of Japanese prime ministers and senior officials have paid respects at the Yasukuni shrine, where Tojo and other Class A war criminals are enshrined. For the victims of Japan's wartime aggression, these visits are undoubtedly fresh injury to the victims of the war. More recently, hardline rhetoric has resurfaced among influential political figures. Now, under Prime Minister Sanae Takaichi, we see dangerous steps back. The shadow of Tojo Hideki is long. His crimes are recalled not to reopen old wounds, but to guard against their repetition. Vigilance, history reminds us, is the price of peace.
Massaker, die jetzt Japan nicht nur in China, sondern beispielsweise auch in Korea angerichtet hat. Und wenn die wieder hochkommen sollten, also dieses Kriegervolk Japan, dann könnte das nicht nur über China, sondern über die gesamte Region.
日本要在亚洲军事化，这对其他的国家来讲都是太危险的。
Even some Japanese citizens are appalled, saying that dangerous moves will push Japan to the brink of war. But Takaichi and her right-wing cronies don't care about public opinion. They care about pleasing the nationalist voters who want to restore Japan's glory by erasing its guilt. For years, despite strong opposition from Asian countries and criticism from the international community, some Japanese right-wing politicians have repeatedly visited the shrine.
历史和现实证明，重走军国主义是邪路，也注定是一条死路。与军国主义彻底切割，真心走和平发展道路，是日本获得国际社会，特别是亚洲近邻信任与理解的重要前提。
Exposing the crimes of Yoshijiro Umezu and other Japanese war criminals is not only about remembering history, it is about staying vigilant. The world must clearly recognize that the specter of Japanese militarism has not fully disappeared. Only by confronting the darkness of history can we resolutely defend the light. Only by thoroughly reckoning with past crimes can we jointly safeguard a peaceful future.